Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little different from the themes and topics that I have been mostly focusing on. And it's going to be the first in a number of videos I want to talk about that have to do specifically with kind of the academic approach of understanding generations and how the last several generations have been different. This topic usually is approached from a very biased perspective, one that tends to be a little bit ranty about old people or young people today, that kind of thing. But I've really been interested in the understanding of generations from actual academics and experts on the topic about generations in relationship to historical events. And so I'm a big fan, of course, of Neil Howe's book, Neil Howe and his famous book, landmark book, titled The Fourth Turning, which is understanding about the connection between cycles in history and cycles in generations and generational attitudes, as well as Jonathan Haidt's and Greg Lukianoff's book, The Coddling of the American Mind, which I recently did a book review on. If you want to check out another channel, I'll link it at the end. But I really wanted to make this in light of the passing of actress and singer Doris Day, who passed away at the age of 97 in Carmel Valley, California, just the other day, who was born in 1922 and really became a big singer and actress, starting around the World War II era, going throughout the 50s and into the 60s. And of course, Doris Day is one of the last links really to the golden age of Hollywood, that era. And generally speaking, we're losing fast some of the very few people who remain who came of age, during the 1930s and 40s of, the era of the Great Depression and World War II. And so that's why I think that there's a lot of things that we can really learn from generations, and that's really what I'm talking about here. Now, first of all, it's really important to understand that people are individuals of, regardless of what generation they're in, and every generation has its good individuals and its bad individuals, absolutely. But there's a few things I've really been kind of fascinated by with all these different generations. And one thing I really noticed that really stands out and kind of almost juxtaposed of the era, the generation that Doris Day belongs to, people who were born from, like, say, 1910 to the mid to late 1920s, is that the times that they lived through, the times that they came of age in, were some of the hardest and worst times in the 20th century, but yet the music and the movies and the culture that they brought were some of the most upbeat during any time in the 20th century. And I really find that, because it's such a remarkable shift from, say, like the 90s, the time that I came of age in, where you had a lot of very cynical music, movies, and TV, even though it was a very prosperous and peaceful time, relatively speaking. And but you think about that, like swing music, swing and big band. I mean, it's kind of some of the most upbeat music ever, but yet it hit its greatest popularity during the darkest times of the 20th century, World War II. I mean, it was the biggest bloodbath in history, but yet, you look at the music of that time. Glenn Miller was like, everyone, you just hear like In the Mood or something, and it's just like feels really good. Someone commented about how a couple years ago about how they couldn't really get into the Christmas spirit because of what was going on in the world. Well, White Christmas, written by Bing Crosby, was published during the height of World War II, during the height of Nazi occupation of Europe. And, and of course, that's primarily an American perspective. My own grandparents were actually Polish, so they don't really necessarily have the same experience as Americans that would have been living at the time. But you think of that kind of juxtaposed, and even in the UK, which of course did experience bombings during World War II, they had the sign, the whole slogan, "Keep calm and carry on." Now, I guess my question is here is that is there something to learn from a generation that really came up with some of the most upbeat, optimistic, feel-good stuff in some of the darkest times? You know, this that swing and big band music, a lot of the movies that came out during that time, a lot of silly comedy like the Marx Brothers during the Great Depression. You know, the people wanted to escape at that time. Now, today we tend to think of that stuff as being sort of naive. We kind of think of sort of cynicism and nihilism as sort of being realistic. Well, people wanted to escape and be happy when they listened to music and watched movies of that era. Even though, again, it was the worst war ever going on in Europe and in the Pacific. And, and even, of course, that extended to the 1950s. News was rather sugar-coated. There was, kids were told to duck and cover in the case of a nuclear attack, even though that wouldn't have done anything. But, is there some value in calming people? I would sort of make the claim that there is. And I think that there is a lot of value in, when you look at today's statistics on suicide and things like that. Is it really a good thing to have such a negativity? And so I think that's really kind of one of the things that we could really learn from this era, probably more than anything else, is how people remain to be hopeful, optimistic, even during the darkest times, times that most of us can't even possibly imagine, with so many men being sent overseas. And again, like I said, no generation is perfect. A lot of men returning from World War II, did actually have what we now know as PTSD and then just dealt with it by drinking, and it's important to know that even though most men were serving in the armed forces during World War II, most of them were not storming the beach in Normandy, but still bravely served in their own way. So yeah, that's, I think, kind of something really interesting to kind of consider. Years ago, I also read a book that I'll also link in the description called Culture of Fear by Barry Glasner. But I've always been a big believer that the media today and their sensationalism and their, has really caused, I think, a lot of, problems, I think, in our society today. So again, I think one of the greatest takeaways from the generation that lived through the Great Depression and World War II that we're quickly losing, there's still, certainly if you go to your local nursing home, there's going to be some. But, there's not that many left because they're all in their, they're all in their 90s, okay? And, people don't live too much longer past then. But that's something to really keep in mind. So next time you're kind of feeling down about the state of the world today, just remember, listen to some, go onto YouTube, listen to some Glenn Miller, and consider the fact that this was the music that was most popular during the most darkest, most uncertain times in the last 100 years. And think of all the entertainers that brought musicals and other kinds of film of this golden age of Hollywood. And people were always smiling. And I think there's a lesson for that for us today. So that's why I wanted to make this video on. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope it gave you something to think about. And with that, check out some of my other videos. If you like this video, feel free to click the like icon, and if you like my other videos, my other content I create mostly on nature and outdoor topics in California, then by all means, feel free to subscribe and to share this. So with that, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you next time.